Greetings and welcome to another series of weekly devotionals where we take a look at one of the lectionary readings for the upcoming week and offer some thoughts for reflection and meditation. This week we're going to look, as we move through the season of Advent, going to look at a few short verses in the book of the prophet Micah, and also how they relate to a very familiar and popular Christmas hymn, because Micah talks about the town of Bethlehem, and one of the favorite Christmas hymns is "O Little Town of Bethlehem." And I remember as a kid hearing that hymn, and I was a bit confused because growing up in the Lehigh Valley, of course, I thought the Bethlehem that they were talking about was the one that was about 10 miles east of where I grew up. And only later did I learn that there was also a Bethlehem over in the Holy Land, over across the Atlantic in Israel. The man, Philip Brooks, who wrote that hymn, may also have been a little bit confused about the reality of Bethlehem for the people of Israel. He took a horse-drawn carriage ride through the town in 1865 and was inspired to write the hymn, "O Little Town of Bethlehem." And in the hymn, he sort of portrays the image of this warm and peaceful hamlet, the kind of village or town you might see on the front of a Christmas card. But for the prophet Micah, the reality of the town of Bethlehem was much different than in the familiar hymn that we sing every Christmas. For the people of Israel in Micah's time, they were living in very trying times, very trying circumstances. They were living under oppression after oppression. The Assyrians, and then, of course, exile in Babylon. And he writes, the prophet Micah, "If the Assyrians come into our land and tread upon our soil, we will raise against them shepherds and rulers. And you, Bethlehem, from you shall come forth for me one who is to rule in Israel." For the prophet Micah, Bethlehem was a source of salvation, of desperate hope in the midst of very difficult circumstances. When we hear the line in the hymn, "The hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee tonight." For Micah, those fears were very real, and the hopes were very desperate hopes. And I think that's certainly true when we think of the original Christmas story, Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus in Bethlehem. They too were living under the oppression, under the thumb of oppression by the Romans. And of course, they had fled or were fleeing King Herod in that Christmas story. Mary was an unwed mother, and so faced scorn and possibly much worse. And of course, she gave birth in a barn with smelly animals all around. It was a very sort of stark and gritty scene, not really the warm and peaceful hamlet that we so often imagine. But I think that the original Christmas story and Micah's vision of Bethlehem serve us well during the Christmas season, because the reality is for a lot of us, Christmas can be difficult. It's not always warm and peaceful and joyful and good cheer and all of that holiday happiness. Christmas, the season of Christmas, can sometimes be a season filled with grief and sadness and difficult and trying times. But these words from the prophet and the original Christmas story remind us that in the midst of whatever circumstances we're living through, joy and peace and cheer, or fear and desperation and oppression, we are assured that God comes. And that is the promise of Christmas. Amen.